Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gates to Chaos, where we discuss the paranormal, magic, and all things that go bump in the night. I'm your host, the Gatekeeper. Tonight's episode, the gate we'll be opening, is one of magic. This episode is something that I think everyone should hear when they first start out. It is red flags to look out for when you're just starting on this path. With the massive influx of people interested in magic these days, thanks to pop culture largely, and TikTok and other social media platforms, it is turning into a feeding ground for predators that inevitably congregate around paths such as this, or any religion, to be perfectly honest. And though these other people might not be as bad as predators, they can be damaging to the overall acceptance, the overall image of people that believe in magic. And these people are what is known as the chosen one syndrome, or I like to call it anime syndrome, because though anime is a wonderful way to spend your time and enjoy yourself whenever you get home from work or something like that, it is not okay to try to base your practice and your life after a fictional source such as that. They always have vast cosmic powers. They didn't have to learn magic, they just had to learn how to control it or how not to do it. When I wish it, it just happens. So here are some red flags for new practitioners to look out for if they're trying to find a mentor or they're just getting onto this path of magic. The first one that I'm going to discuss is the most important one, in my opinion. And this is one that I have seen evidence of time and time again over my decade plus of practicing and researching witchcraft and magic. And this is, if they are a mentor, or you want them to be a mentor, or they are a teacher of yours, and they try to sleep with you, run. I don't care if y'all are both of age. I don't care if you're both consenting adults. A mentor or a teacher is in a position of power over you because they are teaching you. It's skeezy for a professor to sleep with a college student, is it not? Most people would agree with that statement. The same applies here. The minute a mentor tries to cross that line, they reveal what they're really after. That is predatory behavior. They're not really interested in teaching you magic. They're not really interested in having students. What they want is a harem. Plain and simple. They are using this path, your thirst for knowledge, against you in order to coerce young individuals or more gullible individuals. And I hate using that because I'm not saying people that are starting out are gullible. It's just that because this is such a hidden path, so to speak, we have this thirst for knowledge. We have this thirst for other people like us whenever we first start out. I know I had it. So it's not a judgment call, and I don't mean to say that everyone that believes in magic is gullible. It's just that anyone that wants to learn one of these fringe cultures, one of these fringe subjects, they are more easily coerced into sleeping with these predatory individuals because they know that there's not a great repository of knowledge, of teachers out there for us to learn from. Though, thankfully, there are plenty of books nowadays that people can learn from rather than having to search out for a mentor. But there is something to be said of having that hand to hold yours while you are trying to navigate this path. As I mentioned before, it is much easier to be guided down it than to stumble along the road and hope that you don't slip and fall into a hole that you could have easily avoided if someone was there to teach you. Now, this being said, if you and your mentor or your teacher want to pursue a relationship or a sexual relationship with each other after your training is done and you're colleagues now instead of student and teacher, go for it. You know, I don't want to say that developing feelings for one another is bad, and because that's not the case. But when you are in that learning position and they are in that position of power over you and they try to abuse it, that is what you need to look out for. Now, the next red flag is an elephant in the room that we need to address. Ask any historian, ask any scholar, and they will tell you that the Abrahamic religions absolutely won. Particularly in the European regions, especially, which is where a lot of modern day magic comes from. So, they've already disproven the ancient witch cult theory that supposedly operated in secret and survived through the ages. To paraphrase the author John Michael Greer, if they claim to be part of some ancient line or society with vast knowledge of ancient magic, they are full of it. This is not to say that family lines are not a thing, but if they claim something they can't substantiate, run. Folk magic absolutely survived, yes, but it has a lot to do with Christianity. It has a lot to do with the Christian God. That's not bad, but a lot of what I see nowadays are people that claim to have some ancient family lineage and they're worshiping these deities and they've done so for hundreds of generations or something like that. They would not have been able to survive. Now, regions that were introduced to Christianity later in their history, this isn't the case. Like, I wouldn't go to Japan and say, oh, if you're learning Shinto and they tell you that this is an ancient tradition, that those Shinto teachers are full of it, that's not the case. But the European traditions of magic absolutely were bulldozed by Christianity. It's one of the reasons why we can only reconstruct, to the best of our knowledge, Celtic religions or Druidism or anything like that. We didn't write anything down for those traditions for the most part. They have next to no knowledge of what the Druids actually believed. We have next to no knowledge of how the Celtic religion kind of structured itself. That's why the gods and the spirits and the fairies and the dead all blend together, and we don't know if they were just a ghost of someone that was persecuted or their legitimate deity or something like that. Not to say that they can't be a legitimate deity just because they were alive at some point, since that is kind of something that actually happens in Shinto, so who's to say it didn't happen in other cultures? But I'm kind of getting off track at this point. The next one is, if they claim to have learned all their magic from a mysterious source that they can't or won't produce, they're full of it. Run. I watched someone within an old town of Missouri that I used to live in, that within months of getting into magic, they supposedly found a mysterious woman in the woods of Podunk, Missouri, that taught her for years. But notice how her length of time of practicing increased out of nowhere, and then died of a heart attack but somehow there was no record of her death. I was in the room when she first walked in and said she was brand new and she wanted to learn, and then months later, she had years of experience. I run into a man in Texas who claims to have learned all about magic from a mysterious book that his ex-wife conveniently gave away. If a mentor can't point you in the direction of books to learn from, they're not worth your time. Independently verify everything. Follow nothing blindly. Even people with family folk magic traditions still research when they're serious about this practice. It is something that you will never stop doing. You'll never stop reading books. You'll never stop researching. This is, quite frankly, almost a scholarly path. The next one is something that I also see a lot nowadays. If they claim a tradition, but they can't trace their line back to the creator of said tradition, they are not legitimate. People don't like talking about it, but Gardnerian Wiccans and Alexandrian Wiccans are absolutely tradition-based. They are, for lack of a better term, closed practices. People don't like hearing that. But to claim that term, and I've seen people claim that term, and when I ask them, like, oh, who taught you, or anything like that, and no one taught them, you cannot claim that title of that tradition without being inducted into that tradition. Reiki is particularly bad about this. You are technically supposed to be able to trace your certificates, your teachers, all the way back to the original sources of Reiki, the creators of that tradition. Now, I'm not saying you cannot be self-taught. When I first started on this path, I was in the middle of the Bible Belt. Hell, I've spent most of my time in the Bible Belt. Finding teachers is not always easy, so instead of turning to fleshy teachers, I turned to paper teachers instead. I bought books. I dedicated a lot of my time to researching, and I still, to this day, buy different kinds of books or find different kind of books to read and learn from. I don't just localize my attention on one tradition for me personally. So though someone may be book-taught or self-taught, if they cannot point you to the books that they learned from, then they're not worth your time. The next one is if they seem to have learned everything from fantasy sources, run. The anime syndrome people suffer from this one a lot. You can absolutely get inspiration from fantasy magic. Some of the best rituals and wards and spells I've seen have come from someone who saw an idea in a show or a book, and they took that idea and they applied real magic to get a similar result. I saw someone use Maleficent's thorn wall as a basis on how they might actually want to structure their wards, and so they went out and they found thorny vines or plants and used that in their construction. But you have to put in time and effort to learn. You can't just watch The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina or Salem or Witches of East End or anything dealing with magic and fantasy and think that it's all going to apply directly as is. There was someone that made the rounds when Salem was first becoming popular in all of the online witch groups, asking how they get their familiar, how they get their witch's teeth. And they didn't want to hear that that was a fictional source, that they're basing their belief off of a TV show. And though the belief of the witch's teat was a thing back in the day for the witch hunters. It was just an easy way to point the finger at someone and say, see, aha, they have a witch's teat, they're a witch. It could have been anything from a skin tag to a mole, or in the rare cases, actual third nipples. But this person didn't want to hear it. And that's not something that you're only going to find in young people either. I've known older people that their magic changes as soon as they read a new book and they start discussing things. And when I first met them, The Covenant, that movie, was popular, and they told me that every spell that I practiced would chip away at my life and I wouldn't live such a long life. And practitioners usually live naturally long lives, but the more magic you do, the less life force you have, and therefore you'll live an average life or in a less than average lifespan. So it's not just prevalent in the young generation. Don't think just because someone's older than you that they automatically learn from the proper channels, or that they're not susceptible to these pitfalls. Now, this one is one that might not be as red flaggy as people see it, as some of these other ones are, but it's just a red flag that I have noticed over the years as well. If they jump from group to group and they are unable to, or they refuse to practice magic alone, run. More cases than not, I have found them to be what people would label a psychic vampire. They're a parasite. They are unable, I don't know if their magic is ineffective by themselves, but as soon as one group falls apart or kicks them out, they find another one at the drop of a hat. They surround themselves with drama and they ingratiate themselves to these people just to always have fellow practitioners around them. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, finding other fellow practitioners that actually want to congregate, that actually want to practice together, is a feat in and of itself. We live in the age of the solitary practitioner. Information is available to us at the click of a button, at the purchase using a debit card, or anything like that. We can find books, we can find communities online. So some of us wonder, what's the point in even finding a group? Not to mention that some of the groups that people find whenever they first start out absolutely have some of the red flags that we have listed in this podcast. One of the ones that is most prevalent in groups that I've seen people talk about is the sex between the mentor and the mentee. And it's not just male mentors that take advantage of female mentees, or male mentors that take advantage of young male mentees, as I have seen plenty of that from one of the groups that was popular around my area in Missouri. But you also have the opposite. There are instances of female mentors that take advantage of young male mentees. It is not just one gender being the massive perpetrator, especially in this path, since women are often seen as the ideal norm for those interested in magic. And gender and magic is going to be a future episode, so I'm not going to get too far into that. Now, this last thing that I want to cover, just really quick, isn't really a red flag, at least not for new practitioners. It tends to be a red flag for the more experienced practitioners or the older generation. But please stop calling yourselves baby witches. The term baby is used to describe something that is helpless, that has to be spoon-fed information or it just will not learn. That is not the case. None of y'all that are looking to get into magic are helpless. Every single one of you are capable of learning by yourselves if you put in the time and effort. And though this does not apply to everyone, I have seen most people that call themselves baby witches absolutely live up to the name. They refuse to put in any effort. They ask the most inane questions online, things that just even a quick Google search. And I'm not one to point people to Google for magic because that is not a good way to go about it. But there's enough legitimate online sources out there that it's very easy to learn about the elements online. It's very easy to learn basic circle casting techniques online. Please be willing to put in the effort. Because why would a teacher want to have someone that calls himself a baby witch and lives up to the name? Why would they be willing to teach you when obviously you're not willing to put in the effort? I don't know. Maybe I'm alone here, but it's just something that irks my nerves a little bit. But thank you for joining me on this podcast of Red Flags. Hopefully it's a little bit of an eye-opener and the people listening know the things to look out for, and if they see things like this happening around them, they can get out before it develops into a problem. If I haven't lost any of y'all at this point, feel free to join us on YouTube, or if you want to stay an episode ahead of everyone, feel free to join us on Patreon. It'll be one episode ahead of the usual shows that I release on other platforms. Feel free to share this with your friends. I would love to have y'all. And as always, if you're enjoying the night with me, feel free to pull up a chair around the fire, stay for a spell, and before the clock strikes 3, always make sure your doors are locked. Ignore the scratching on the walls, the footsteps down your halls, and always utilize your blanket of safety in dire emergencies. Thanks for listening, and I'll see y'all next time.